Hello and welcome today on Microsoft Security Review. Carl B. Johnson will be discussing Microsoft GCC and GCC High. Carl, thank you so much for being here. Welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you, and thank you for having me.
It's the pleasure is all ours. Carl works as a Microsoft GCC and GCC High consultant focused on security and CMMC compliance. Carl, I keep hearing about Microsoft GCC and GCC High. Can you explain to us and to our audience exactly what this means?
Absolutely, and thank you once again. I think it's best to start with what type of customer you are and what your goals are as an organization. If your organization has a contract with the federal government, let's say like a DoD, Department of Defense, or Department of Commerce, FBI, et cetera, likely you're handling information that may be classified, or you're handling information that we call COI, which is, of course, information that is identifiable, but is not considered classified. For that reason, the federal government and also the state government requires additional layer of security to store their information that you're working with. And that's where you get into where you might hear GCC or GCC High. GCC, which stands for Government Community Cloud, and then you also hear Government Community Cloud High. The difference between the two is that in GCC is really one, a separation between the Microsoft commercial tenant, like you might see Office 365, for instance. Well, in GCC think of it as kind of segregated from there. So it's more security. The personnel that has access to it has to be U.S. citizens. And also the cloud itself is only within the United States. It's not outside the country. With GCC High, on the other hand, it's if you're an organization and you deal with export of, a perfect example is CAD or drawings or technical documents or information. And one is like a satellite company or a company that deals with missiles, where you deal with something called ITAR. Then the requirement is that you're inside of GCC High, which think of GCC, but GCC High is on steroids when it comes to security. Higher levels of segregation, and with third-party, the ability to work with third-party applications is very limited. So think of all your information being jailed into one specific area, which improves on security and also improves on logging and threat detection due to its amount of security that surrounds it.
Okay, thank you so much for explaining that. Now, I do want to ask you though about the migration to Microsoft GCC and GCC High. I know a lot of businesses are doing that. Can you explain the benefits of a business or company migrating to Microsoft GCC or GCC High?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I think the biggest benefit is that more business. And here we're in 2021, and I'm seeing already that, or inside of the RFPs that are going out from the DoD, the Pentagon, FBI, DOC, one of the requirements is what exactly is your security posture? Where are you going to be storing our information? So you even have, you have federal agencies that are looking at the vendors and saying, how exactly are you going to be storing our information? And so you don't necessarily have to be inside of GCC High, but when we were talking about migration, Microsoft, I would say is probably has the best suite and tenet of tools when it comes to security and when it comes to separation of applications with your GCC High. So obviously the ability to gain more contracts with the federal government is your probably your biggest plus. Your second is just peace of mind, right? Whether we're talking about phishing attacks or if we're talking about ransomware, if we're just vulnerability detection, you want to be able to comfortably say that the information that you're storing for the federal government is protected. The last thing you want to do is be a part of a breach and have to report back to your agency that their information has been breached, and now you have to go through the process with the FSO, the federal security officer. So yes, it's an additional cost, but that peace of mind, I think, is the biggest benefit of all.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for that explanation. You didn't mention it, but I know that there is the CUI aspect to it. Can you please explain just CUI and what that means? I know we've just been hearing a lot about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So CUI stands for Controlled Unclassified Information. And in short, think of it as the information is not necessarily, top secret or secret, but it does contain sensitive information, such as identifiable information about an actual agency. A great example would be, let's say, a missile requirements request. RFP is going out and is asking vendors to submit their blueprints for a missile that the federal government wants to create. Now, the information is, most part of it is going to consider be public, right? Because it's in the RFP that they've put out, but there may be specific information inside of your proposal that may contain some CUI. And I think, CUI itself doesn't get enough attention of its importance when it comes to your organization labeling your data types that is CUI that may contain sensitive information is important. A lot of times organizations will group all their information together, their procurement, their HR, but really as an organization, think about having a CUI program or plan together that is segregated from everything else in your organization. If you're going to CMMC, like a level 3 to level 5, your auditor is going to ask you, where exactly do you store your CUI? And if your answer is with everything else, then you'll automatically fail that audit. So it's best now to start thinking about segregating your CUI within your organization and within your tenant. And this doesn't necessarily just mean GCC or GCC High. Even if you're in commercial or even if you're in Google, still get start to get used to separating the CUI. Inside of commercial Microsoft or GCC or GCC High, there is something called unified labeling, which allows you to basically label all of your documents. So if it is CUI, there's automatically a label watermark that has been created for it. That makes things easier. But either way, work with your FSO, work with your security officer, and start a program internally to control your CUI and make sure it's segregated from everything else.
Thank you. Well, listen, security is huge in 2021. It's just going to be even more important as we move along. And we really appreciate your expertise on GCC, GCC High, and just, all the ins and outs of, working with the government and high security information. So really appreciate your expertise and your knowledge about this. Can you please tell us just where we can find more information about migrating to Microsoft GCC, Microsoft GCC High, and just anything else really within this kind of security environment?
Yeah, absolutely. You can reach me at clearedsystems.com. I help organizations, MSPs, or just federal contractors navigate to migrating over to GCC High itself. It's a huge. I think it's a huge ordeal to take your organization that may be inside of Google or commercial Microsoft all these years and move it into GCC GCC High. And so I can help with the pitfalls that come with that, and also kind of relieve some of the stress of taking your organization and moving it directly into GCC GCC High, and working with the Microsoft government tenant.
Okay, thank you. And just one more question that I have. In terms of like importance, I mean, I understand that it means more business. It means, you know, the capability of just being able to do more for your clients. But can you kind of give us like an idea of how important or how much it does benefit your business to migrate over?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, and that's a great question. It's so. I think what we'll start to see in the very near future is that I'll give you a perfect example. Let's say you have a contract with Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin is inside of GCC or GCC High. You're going to start to see that the prime contractor, and let's say it's Lockheed Martin, is going to start to be responsible for all its subcontractors when it comes to security as well. Meaning, if you got hacked, right, as a subcontractor, well, Lockheed Martin is responsible for you just as well. And you see that a lot in HIPAA, which is more on the healthcare side of the OCR and inside of that world. But I think one of the benefits is to do it now before you're asked to do it, right? Understand the cost, understand what's involved now than being forced into moving into a government tenant or a government cloud. And that way you're ahead of the game. And then especially if you're going to CMMC and going through an audit, you want to be ahead by saying that we already have plans to move all of our users into the government cloud versus the auditor, suggesting that you do it. Because it's one less thing that you have to be scored on. So I mean, the benefits are huge for an organization. I mean, you look at just the gas pipeline that happened a month ago that was hacked. Now that's not to say that they're GCC High or anything like that, but it just tells you that hackers and people that are trying to penetrate your environment, they're working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You cannot rest alone thinking that the tenant that you currently have your information in is secure. It's best to have limited access as much as possible. That way, again, you're not involved in, or at least limits the amount of risk that you take as an organization. You really want to lower that score as much as possible. And moving to GCC High, that's the first step.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. And can you just say your information one more time, your website, how to reach you?
Absolutely. You can reach me by you can reach me by email at carl@clearsystems.com. But you can also reach me just by going to clearsystems.com.
Okay.
I'll leave my information below.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you so much, Carl. This was extremely informative and enlightening, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
It's great to join you. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. All right. Well, happy 4th of July and have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.